Hi, I'm Michael Swaine, the director of the East Asia program at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. And I'm joined today with my colleague Jess Lee, also of the East Asia program. Jess focuses most of her work on efforts to reduce tensions and stabilize the Korean Peninsula. I want to speak with her today about a new report that she and a colleague at USIP, Frank Aum, and the Sejong Institute in Korea have put together describing the outcome of a virtual role-playing game to do with peace on the peninsula that they conducted in October of 2021. It simulated diplomatic negotiations between the US, North Korea, South Korea, and China in efforts to begin the process of building a peace regime on the peninsula. So, Jess, let me start with a basic question. What led you to pursue this project, and what were you really hoping to achieve from it?
Thanks, Michael. It's great to be with you. We hear a lot in Washington about war games. This is something that typically, folks at DoD, Defense Department, and security experts kind of conduct to explore effects of warfare and test strategies without actual combat. And so my colleagues and I wanted to explore that level of simulation, but for diplomats. And that's exactly what a peace game exercise entails. We wanted to specifically use this as an opportunity to reframe the assumption that traditional war games have about North Korea, which is that it's an ever growing malign threat. And instead focus more on sort of mutually shared goals of deterring conflict, managing instability, and avoiding war. And so throughout the process, our goal was to highlight non-military steps that officials could take to reduce tensions and reach a final peace agreement on the peninsula, and that it can be done without undermining core US security interests.
Well, as someone who's done a lot of dialogues and simulations, particularly with the Chinese on crises, on tension increasing sort of crises, it's interesting that you were doing a simulation here on how to move in reverse, how to build peace on the peninsula in somewhat new ways. But were there any constraints in conducting a kind of virtual tabletop peace game exercise? How do you think it would have been different if you'd been able to do it in person?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the fact that this was a multi-day exercise over Zoom, first of all, it's exhausting to be on Zoom for many hours.
Right.
And there, of course, real constraints because you're not actually, with the people that you're supposed to be in the same team as. That said, I think the biggest constraint in conducting this exercise and in writing the report, of course, was the fact that we didn't have any North Koreans participate. And that, greatly limited, I think our ability to generate fresh insights on what the North Korean government is thinking and what it would be willing to trade, as the project showed that conciliatory steps were required on all sides to move the process along. So instead of North Koreans, we had one American and three Chinese experts who are all, senior experts on North Korea issues, kind of play in the North Korea team and serve as North Korean negotiators. But of course, they were constrained again by the fact that none of them, had direct insight or even secondary insight into the government's current thinking and dynamics there. And that in turn, of course, made it difficult to confidently represent, what measures North Korea would demand and concede and what risks it would be willing to take.
And so, what do you think the difference would have been if you'd actually been able to get in a room with the Chinese and even perhaps some North Koreans?
For me, as somebody who speaks Korean, it would have been just interesting to see, how North Koreans talk and South Koreans too, of course, and how they kind of interact with each other, off camera, so to speak, outside of the official negotiations, and just see how they are able to, kind of bridge real barriers that exist, on so many of these issues. But on an interpersonal level, when you speak in someone else's language, I think first of all that opens sort of more opportunities for understanding, and I've certainly felt that when I speak Korean with South Korean interlocutors.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen the same sort of thing. I've done both in person and virtual. simulations and dialogues, and definitely in person does have its advantages, particularly in the offline kinds of conversations you might be able to have and the relationships you might be able to develop over time. So let me ask you, what surprised you the most about this exercise? What did you carry away from that was really kind of a surprise for you?
The United States and North Korea were the principal actors, but unfortunately, they were the least willing to generate new ideas and kind of build momentum. Um, any outside the box thinking or catalysts, came really from South Korea and China teams instead. And it wasn't really until we injected a presidential kind of a statement saying, you must come to an agreement by this final round, and I will fully back whatever you negotiate. That U.S. and North Korean teams were actually willing to talk and actually negotiate rather than, kind of be standoffish about the whole process and insist on maximalist demands, which I think tended to happen more in the first and second round. I mean, of course, no war game or peace game exercise can predict future behavior. We know that. But still, these insights are incredibly useful, given, as you know, how much the US government is currently focused on. So to have real sustained attention to the North Korea issue and really looking beyond North Korea as a security threat and looking at it through a more holistic lens of how can we work together in some sense to advance mutually shared goals. I think that is a revolutionary idea.
I really do think that an exercise like this is necessary to really try and show that you can have some kind of a effort to try to approach the idea of developing peace on the Korean Peninsula that doesn't just simply assume that this kind of a effort is really useless because everything's been tried, everything's been done. I think it's something really valuable because it really does begin, as you say, to explore some of the greater complexities of thinking on all sides in trying to not, of course, in any way dismiss the security issues involved here, including the nuclear issue, but to try to think through how an effort to try to build peace on the peninsula can relate to these larger security issues and what kinds of language, what kinds of logic, what kinds of policies and approaches you might be able to adopt to try and get some movement in a positive and a stabilizing direction on the part of all parties. And so I really commend you on doing this, Jess, you and your colleagues, and really interested to see the report that you have just issued.
Thank you so much.